delighted and slightly embarrassed to say that this is the first ever sketchbook I have ever completed cover to cover, despite painting pretty much my entire life. And it sounds really weird that I've never really been one to sit down and fill a sketchbook like you see everyone on social media doing, and I've always felt a bit down on myself for that. So I thought it would probably be a good idea to actually share my thoughts a little bit in case anyone else out there is feeling that way too, because I'm sure there are people who are just like me and who always paint on pieces of paper and are scared to grab that sketchbook that has such a pretty cover and actually possibly ruin the pages. So that is the topic of today's video, kind of discussing that perfectionism that has led me, and possibly you, to never use those gorgeous sketchbooks. And I am guilty of this. I was gifted the most gorgeous sketchbook, which is actually in one of my other videos, where I swatched the paints and sketchbook I got for my birthday. And since then, I have filled exactly one page of that sketchbook, barring the swatch page. And for some reason, I am actually scared to fill that sketchbook. And it's really stupid. It's really silly. But I'm sure there are other people who feel the same. And it's okay. Because if you're anything like me, you get perfectionistic when you're painting and very emotional, and when things are not going right, they really are not going right, and you just want to tear that page out of your sketchbook, understandably, because it's not going the way you wanted it to, the way you envisioned. And I have really been reflecting on this recently, that is part of my perfectionism, and that actually prevents me from developing my art, because I am scared to try something new, to make a mistake. And that's not a way to improve, because to improve your art, you really do have to make mistakes. Annoying as it is, because it is so much more fun to just paint a piece that really goes well. Like, this piece was so much fun to paint. It was so beautifully coming together. Like, the paint was working. The sketchbook page was just, it felt nice to paint on, despite it being rough paper, which isn't my usual. It just worked. It came together and it was so much fun. But I wouldn't say that this piece was pushing me out of my comfort zone. You know, you don't always have to be pushing to the next stage and the next progress. Like, constantly progressing. It's not necessary. But I would like to have a few more sketchbooks that I've actually used. I know myself, and I'm sure many other artists, love to collect sketchbooks. I've just moved into a flat, and so much of the art materials I brought with me are empty pages and empty sketchbooks. And that's kind of sad. I've got a lot of watercolour paper, which is probably part of my issue, because some of my favourite papers are simply that, individual papers, and are not part of a sketchbook. So sometimes when I want to paint, I just sit down and I'll grab some of that Canson paper that I really like, rather than fuss about with a sketchbook whose paper I may not know, and that's understandable. But one of my goals for this year will be to actually fill a sketchbook, and to fill it with scribbles, and to fill it with ideas and little characters and all the things that I'm scared of ruining the sketchbook with, because if it goes wrong, it'll look really weird. I imagine that there are many artists out there who, like me, look at social media and see these gorgeous sketchbooks, and I'm guilty of it too. I only post the pieces I like and the pieces that went well and that I'm happy with on my social media. So I am adding a little bit to the problem, and I admit that. So one of my goals may be, if I'm comfortable, to push myself to actually share some more incomplete art in its ugly stages, that kind of thing. because I think this is a bit of a problem with social media, and how whenever I look on my Instagram, and maybe this is an Instagram problem more than anything, I see stunning sketchbook flip-throughs. I see pages upon pages of finished work, and they are gorgeous. And then I go to post, and I think, with all the lovely sketchbooks that people have seen on their page, all they want to see my scribbles. And that's a really detrimental thought process to actually breaking this cycle of just perfect sketchbooks that everyone sees online. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love seeing all these gorgeous sketchbooks and pages and everything, but the one thing it does do to my artistic mind is this comparison, and I'm working on that, but there's only so much that I can prevent it. It is a natural part of being online, is this comparison that everybody does, comparing everyone's skills, comparing everyone's art supplies even. You know, that person has, that they have the paints I really want, but they're really expensive, or a sketchbook, some sort of art supply. There's always this comparison on social media, and that won't go away. But what can be done, I suppose, is sharing more of the imperfections. And I'm sure there are artists out there already doing that, and I just haven't found them. So if you know of any artists that share, you know, the less than perfect art pieces or in progress pages in their sketchbook, please go ahead, add them into the comments, and I'll go have a look, because I would love to change up my feed a bit more and make it a little bit more of a developmentally friendly page. That is unfortunately, I think, down to social media, and sometimes I let social media guide what I'm going to post and what I'm going to share and what I'm going to make. Even sometimes I don't want to fill the sketchbook with anything I wouldn't post. So that is a goal. I don't do resolutions so much as goals, because I feel like resolutions, it's easy to drop them. But my goal for this year is to try and be a little bit more open, a little bit more experimental, and less perfectionistic. And I feel like that's been a goal for me forever, but we're still going. We're still learning and developing that. So that's been me rambling for a while about that fear of using a sketchbook and how I feel it is kind of tied to the art social media scape that currently exists online. And maybe it's just on my feed. I really hope it is just on my feed, but I imagine that there are quite a few people out there experiencing that same kind of pressure. And maybe it's pressure I'm putting on myself, sure, and I could fight it. But if you don't post something that social media approves of, and the algorithm likes, then it doesn't get pushed out, and you don't get that validation. And half of the point, if we're being honest with ourselves, of posting to social media is to get some form of validation. It shouldn't be. Something I'm working on, to not let my social media likes guide how I feel about my art, but unfortunately it can do. And there have been times where I've let the numbers guide that, and it's really silly, and it's not good, because it's not real. The number of likes on an Instagram post does not equal how good my art is, or how much that art has developed over time. It might indicate that I'm doing better, sure, than I was before, but it'll lead to me comparing, and that's just not fun. And it's not conducive to me actually improving, and that's the goal of it, for me at least. Right. After all that rambling about perfectionism and sketchbook fear, here is the finished piece of this landscape with flowers I really wanted to use orange because that is a colour that I find a little bit intimidating due to its vibrancy. I feel like it can overpower other colours, so I thought if it's going to overpower, let's make it the main focus. And I really like doing this piece. I'm really pleased that this is the final page in my first ever cover-to-cover filled sketchbook. So there we have it. Now, starting with the fun bit, the sketchbook flip through. This piece was a piece I did a tutorial on, which is on my YouTube. This piece was a fun little experiment in getting used to the rough paper because while doing that tutorial I discovered rough paper is very different from cold pressed paper. Then this next piece was my favourite in the sketchbook, 3 little seascapes, also on my YouTube channel. I've done a lot in this sketchbook that has gone onto my channel. Next up was one that was an experiment with watercolour inks that my partner got me for, I think, Christmas last year. So that was very fun, very watery, and I really loved how it blended together. This piece is not my favourite, but I did not tear it out my sketchbook, and we kept it and we worked on it. It still looks like clouds to me, but could be better. This little spread, absolutely loved. I love painting little isolated houses in the middle of nowhere. Just vibing. I love it. I want to paint more of those. This was a fun little experiment in depth. I saw this like monochrome mountainscape on Pinterest and I decided I wanted to paint my own. I did find that this kind of crystallized on the page, so I wasn't sure about those watercolours. Another mountainscape. This one with trees. Mountainscapes. I love them, as you can tell. Now this one was using some handmade watercolours. I wanted to see how they formed along the page on this rough texture. This one I was really pleased with because sometimes I overpaint. So this one I did on an Instagram live and I wanted to underpaint and do minimalism almost. And back to maximalism. This one is of Hampstead Heath. There's a beautiful little place called Vale of the Heath and I went and sat there and took some reference images and came back and painted it. And I loved it. Again, another little house and tree. I just love this type of spread. Trying to push myself to do more minimalism in my watercolours. This is my least favourite page. Not to go in with some veracity against it. It just didn't turn out how I liked, but we haven't torn it out the sketchbook. That's a win. This one also didn't quite go right because I forgot that if you're looking up at clouds, the raindrops don't quite look like that. So perspective wise didn't quite work out, but this one was fun because I practiced wax crayons with watercolour and can't complain, like how it turns out. It has a cool texture, love it. Now back to my usual Seascapes in gouache. This was using the jelly gouaches again and loved it, had so much fun painting it and really pleased I pushed myself to just paint. This is my other favourite spread in the sketchbook. And yeah, water lilies, seascapes and mountainscapes, they really just capture me. And as you see, the page we just painted. A little bit of a close-up, I added some pen through it and I really love how this turned out. Really pleased with it and I hope you liked it too. So thanks so much for listening to my rambles and I hope you have a lovely day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!